I'd like to call this quarterly meeting of the Audit Committee to order at 12 o'clock. If you would please stand and join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered today is unceded territory of the Wakuya people who continue to live and thrive on this land today. It's surrounded by traditional, ancestral, and present homeland of several of Mi'kmaq nations, including the Hupak, Karuk, Matole, Talawa, Waikiki, and Yurok, that make up Humboldt and Del Norte counties. Is there any general comments?
No comment.
No comments. So 3.1 is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes or approved. Vice President Morrison, you're up.
Sure. So for the approval of the final audit, we have, I believe, John, are you on the Zoom?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So we have John Dominguez with us today from CWDL, our audit firm, to walk through some of the highlights of the 22-23 audit. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Excellent. And would you prefer for me to share my screen and walk through that, or I can call out page numbers? What's best for the audit committee?
Maybe share the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then give us highlights. I guess both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's
Perfect.
sharing?
No one.
So I think I might just need to enable that participant screen sharing, and I'd be happy to pull that report up for you.
We are working on it.
Yep.
Well, as we're pulling that up, I'll maybe just kind of speak at a high level. Really good audit results that we have to present to you today. Definitely extend our appreciation to, not only Julia, but the whole, team, fiscal, financial aid, admissions and records. We're kind of getting all over, the college with these requests and this testing, and just a really large volume of data that we have to go through. And, like we've experienced in the past, staff are very much receptive, respond really timely to our requests, really full transparency with everything that we're asking of them. So, couldn't be more pleased with that process and the way that's gone. So appreciate that. And with that, perfect timing. We've got the report up here before you. So we've got the June 30, 2023 audit report. I'll walk through some brief highlights, pause for some questions, but feel free to use the Zoom hand or put a hand up if you've got questions along the way. Feel free to stop me. And then jumping right into that, we're rendering 4 opinions throughout the report. So the first of those opinions is on page 1. That's our opinion on the financial statements taken as a whole. And so this layout is a little different. One of the updates in our audit standards is that the opinion used to be on the last page of this independent auditor's report. It's now front and center. And so we're saying right here in this first paragraph that we've rendered an unmodified opinion. That's the best opinion at our disposal, and essentially means that the financial data and information management provided to us, that we performed all of our audit procedures on, was accurate. It was complete. It agreed without exception to those submitted to the state chancellor's office, via the annual 311 and other report. So excellent opinion on the financial statements. And we do just make mention of a new accounting standard here, the adoption of a new accounting standard, which was GASB statement number 96, analyzing some subscription-based information technology arrangements. The GASB always keeping us on our toes, but district did a flawless job of analyzing and executing that implementation. So very pleased.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
Because I actually was looking at on page 70, the question about that. So what does that actually mean, the new counting?
So what they're looking at there is, as you may recall, the lease standards changed last year, where we kind of basically said we're going to bring all lease activity onto the district's books. What the GASB said was there's a lot of right to use information technology. So there's a lot of web cloud-based computing, both on the educational side and operational side, that the GASB said really needs to be analyzed. And any software that the district doesn't own that it's utilizing, there's a value to that. And they wanted to have that represented in an increase in an asset related to the value that the district is gaining from that lease arrangement. And then there's also a liability that's typically a multi-year type of agreement. So it's really truing up assets and liabilities for the long-term use of subscription-based information, basically IT software and elements that the district doesn't own or didn't develop on its own.
So an example of that would be what's the software program we use for registration and or the instructors? Huh? I'm thinking of another one. So basically you just looked at the value of that and then what it costs.
Yeah, so there's a calculation that the GASB has in their guidance, but yeah, essentially we worked with management to get copies of all the contracts that were identified, and then you look at the length of term. Is it a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year? What's the annual cost? You do discount that back to a present value, especially in the multi-year, and yes, you come up with a value that again really doesn't have a large net impact, because typically the value you're getting basically offsets the cost with that efficient use of the subscription. But yeah, that is the requirement, and that is what was executed here.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. So moving into the MD&A, I just wanted to kind of point out one item here on page 5, just a really nice illustration of the annual FTES. And management speaks to this in some of the narrative form, but pleased to see kind of that restoration of some of the FTES, where we had seen the decline in 2021 continuing into 21-22. Very pleased to see that restoration in that trend coming up here in 23. And then one other item to point out in the MD&A, this is on page 9, is the economic factors. I think management does a really nice job of kind of describing to the reader, some of the recent changes in, the SCIF formula and the impacts that it has there directly for redwoods, a little bit of kind of post-pandemic analysis and evaluation. And then on the following page, just a little bit more information statewide, kind of budget and kind of where we're heading and where we're looking at there. Obviously a little bit on the economic uncertainty, but something that management is well aware of and monitoring. So good information there. As we move into the core financials, those begin on page 12. We have our statement of net position. And this is really what drives a lot of our audit work, is confirming the accuracy and the completeness of all of these balances. So we're confirming cash, we're going through any restrictions on cash, the receivables, all these items. We talked about that GASB 96 subscription. So you see some of this intangible right of use assets that's related to that standard, the traditional capital assets. And the only thing I wanted to point out was we did see an increase in the net position. Prior year had been 93.8. That's increased to 100.9 million. The OPEB liability was very stable. I think declined a slight amount, which was good to see. And then the net pension liability, we did see a fairly significant increase in that net pension liability. The prior year was 19.5 million, has gone up to 33.1. And just a reminder, that's again the district simply taking its proportionate share of both the CalSTRS and the CalPERS system liabilities. Both of those systems remain, severely underfunded, and that liability is recognized on the financials of all participating entities, including Redwoods. Any questions on the district core financials or any of those?
I had a question on page 11.
Sure.
And basically the salaries and benefits went up $8 million in the year. Is that because of the increase in the paying out the new contract, or we didn't hire that many new employees? I didn't think.
So that's a factor of those pension systems. As those liabilities rise on those full accrual statements, that's recognized in large part as a benefit expense. So there's some other factors on the full accrual, again, where we're bringing on all these long-term liabilities above and beyond actual cash benefit payments for employees.
So part of that 8 million is the PERS and or PERS, STIRS, et cetera.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's a good question.
And on page 16, I just wanted to point out we do have the foundation included as a discretely presented component unit. And so we do go through with a team from our firm, but led by a separate individual that I kind of oversee both sides. But they do go through and audit the Redwoods Foundation. And so just wanted to note that they're presenting, the condensed financial information here, beginning on page 16.
And so my question on that, why is it called discretely?
When you go through a component unit analysis, there's a couple different methods that you would come out of that analysis from and determine how to report it. You could have a blended component unit, which would simply mean the cash we saw on the district's net position would include the foundation's cash. And so in this case, they're a separate legal entity. They operate under, FASB standards of guidance. And so our assessment, and that's been consistent with prior years, our assessment is that there's a relationship there between the district and the foundation as an entity, but they're not essentially operated by exclusively the same board. They're not so related that we would just combine those two sets of financials, and they're not so separate that we wouldn't even report it at all. So we felt that middle ground, that discretely presented component unit, was the most appropriate.
And so you actually did do this audit. Somebody else did. This is basically on the foundation board, the audit that we saw in August.
Correct. Yep. So I think Kyle Holt might have presented that to the foundation board. That's exactly right.
Yes,
Is that
it was.
Vice President Morrison? Is that the case? This is exactly these sections are the same.
They're not, I think that what's included in the financial audit for the district, it's not as comprehensive as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So moving into the notes of the financials, we had kind of touched on that pension liability. So on page 32, we have a summary where you can see a breakout of the CalSTRS and CalPERS and some of the other related financial elements, the deferred inflows and outflows. And so I really want to draw the attention to that liability, the 33.1. And if we look at CalSTRS in particular, it's the 12.8 as of this snapshot in time. And then if I move into that detailed footnote on page 36, I wanted to point out, just some of the potential volatility around these balances. So that middle column is the current discount rate that's projected by the CalSTRS audit and actuarial reports. And that brings us to that liability, the 12.8. If they miss that assessment on the discount rate by 1%, we could see that liability increase all the way to 21.8 million. And obviously to the flip side, if they better those detailed assessments and expectations, we could see it decrease to 5.4. But just wanted to point that out on a year-to-year basis. There's a lot of volatility in these liabilities. Those systems remain severely underfunded. And so I just bring that up, just to make you aware that we would expect to see that move quite a bit from year to year. I think maybe over a 10-year trend, we might see some stability, but any given year to year, we're probably going to see some fluctuations in those liabilities.
Well, and that was my question, is on page 43, it says that basically we're making 6.9%. Is that realistic in today's world? I mean, I saw a lot of it had to do with the global part.
Yeah, so that's their expectations, and that's kind of what, brings up that, assessment and that evaluation is that, reasonable in this current market. And again, they're looking more at that 10-year trend, which you might still say, that could even be a touch shy for, the type of, instruments that they're, investing in. But nonetheless, yeah, that is their actuarial, assumption. They also have future healthcare cost trends. There's just a lot of assumptions of data that go into and drive, that liability. So, to answer your question in a roundabout way, yes, that is their assessment. Whether
That's why you previously we're talking about a 1 point difference being, I forgot how much astronomical number. But so if in the real world it was 4.9%, 4.9, then you'd see double that.
Oh yeah, it would be a significant jump. Yes, that's correct.
That's scary.
And tying this all together, the reason we bring it up, if you look back, 10 years ago, we were looking at single digit employer contribution percentages for, really both systems, STRS and PERS. Obviously, we've now more than doubled that. And, the unfunded liability, ultimately becomes funded by, member contributions by participating agencies, as well as employee contributions as well. But that burden, is going to fall largely on the shoulders of districts and all participating members.
And I think at one point, Vice President Morrison said the state was looking at maybe doing something. Has anything come forward on that? Helping college districts?
So they had a surplus of funds several years back, and they did do a supplemental contribution. But obviously, as we see with the liabilities that remain, it was a nice gesture, but I would say maybe didn't move the needle a whole lot. But yes, they did take that action when they had surplus funding.
But I thought there was some mention a while ago. You mentioned that the state was going to look at maybe helping districts with this issue since all of the districts have it, but maybe I misunderstood.
I'm not exactly sure what, you probably not misunderstood, but I'm not sure exactly what you were referring to.
Okay. I mean, this seems like something the district really needs to face head on. I mean, reading all those pages was a little bit daunting and scary. What are other districts doing about this?
We're seeing some, I think they're referred to as like a pension volatility trust. That's an option. Yeah. Yeah. The only, kind of challenges there is, tying up funds, but that's, certainly a discussion and obviously something that you have explored. But I think, trust and or, simply earmarking, reserves for the potential for those increases to come and being able to kind of weather those storms, so to speak.
I have a question.
Sorry.
This is a term that's used in more than one place. I'm back on page 36, where it talks about the district's proportionate share of the net pension liability. And I just want to know if that's that directly tied to our staffing, CalPERS and CalSTRS future liability, or is this some different way of looking at our proportionate share?
So what that means, it's looking at what the CalSTRS system says. This is Redwoods Community College's portion of the liability, and they base that off of the employer contribution. So they look at, how basically the number of employees and who's participating in the system and come up with a percentage, and then they allocate your share of all of the activities, including the liability based on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. I wanted to move on to page 59, which is our reconciliation of fund equity to net position. So we kind of talked about, that net position increasing up to the 100.9 million. It had all those long-term items in nature, the, capital assets, the accumulated depreciation, those liabilities, the pensions, the OPEB. And I think this is a great schedule, that management has in here where you can tie back to the fund activity of the district. So when we're, thinking on, the budget side or thinking on actuals in the 311 report of the chancellor's office, we're seeing, all of this fund financial information here at the top, the 22.3 million. And then this schedule, kind of shows you how do we reconcile from that to that full accrual net position that I talked about, the 100.9. So it's all these items here, the liabilities, assets, all long-term in nature. So just a good comprehensive schedule to help, kind of a reader tie those two different types of reporting under the district, from fund accounting to the full accrual statements here that we have presented. So excellent schedule there. And then lastly, just wanted to point out our schedule of the additional opinions we rendered. So I mentioned 4 in total. Here on page 71, we've got a summary of those other opinions. And so the second opinion we rendered is on the district's internal control over financial reporting and compliance. We did not identify control deficiencies or material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies. So felt there was a strong control environment supported by our testing. And then also on the federal side, we looked at the student financial aid cluster as well as a couple CFDAs of the HERF funding. Did not see instances of noncompliance with federal, nor on the state side. So really, really good results on compliance and on controls. We did not identify any findings. And so with that, kind of summarizes what I wanted to cover, in a really good audit, positive results, and happy to answer any questions you might have on, results, procedures, anything related to the audit.
Trustee Mallory?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question on the, on page 63, actually, this language appears elsewhere, where you talk about deficiencies and you define material weaknesses and significant deficiencies and such. And then you go on to say that material weaknesses may exist that have not been identified. And that gave me some pause. How likely is it? I don't know if you can answer this, that there are material weaknesses that you have not identified, and if you cannot identify, or I should not say you, if the audit cannot identify them, then as a governing board, how would we go about determining whether or not there are material weaknesses?
So I would say, this language is kind of, audit, for lack of a better word, kind of, covering your butt, right?
Yeah.
That we don't look at every single transaction. The district is a big business. There's a large volume of transactions that occur. And so, this language essentially is just saying we didn't look at everything. We couldn't. But to answer your question, how likely is it that there's a material weakness? I would say very unlikely. In all of our sampling, we do statistically significant sampling with a very high confidence interval. And then when we look back to, kind of the financial statements, every one of these numbers on here, we're confirming almost to the dollar, if not down to the penny. So, we're saying, we feel it's a very, very limited chance that there could be a material misstatement, on these financials. When you look at the operating activity, obviously they tie together, right? All of the activity here is what drives those balances. So we're looking at, controls over tuition and fees, over grants and contracts. And so, we put that in there, just to say we didn't look at everything, but, I would say we feel, very confident that there are not material weaknesses that exist.
I completely agree with you. And that was a question I had for President Flavor. It seemed like you disclaimed a whole lot of things,
Yeah.
and that concerned me.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that language is legalese or whatever the term should be when we're talking about accounting. I must have read that paragraph, 5 times, not really fully grasping it until I finally just said, I'll ask the question. So, but thank you for giving us the confidence that it is unlikely that it was both not only material weaknesses, but significant deficiencies that you say you may not have identified. So thanks for providing some assurance on that note.
Sure. Yeah.
But
And
my-
again, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So my other question, I mean, basically though, at the beginning of it, you mentioned that what used to be in the summary is now on the first page. What is the beginning? It was like last year's audit, the summary of findings is now at the beginning and not the end. So this is more not necessarily the summary that we're used to at the end.
Yeah, that one's more referring to this independent auditor's report. It's about a 3 to 4 page report, and the opinion used to, be the last item, because that's, really the most, we feel, significant part. And again, this is industry standard. So all, governmental audit reports, these 2 paragraphs, have come to the forefront rather than being, maybe overlooked in the back. But the other opinions that we've gone through that we just discussed, that language, there have not been any, significant updates to those opinions.
So I had a question, in actually the pages are, page 55, and this may be one more for Vice President Morrison, is all the grants, how does this year's compare to last year's? That was something I would like to have seen. I mean, generally, are we doing more grants in this year than the year before, or?
Off the top of my head, I would say yes in general, with the exception to, and this wouldn't really be a grant, but to the HERF.
Okay.
Since we had to spend all of that down. We have very little left.
I mean, that would be an interest. I mean, I don't know if anybody else would be interested in that, but I would be very interested to see. Just not in detail, but just generally how we're moving forward on that. Because I think you hired a grant writer but I mean, I think
I will,
Vice President Mayer has been,
when she retires.
right, okay. Yeah, but she's been writing grants now.
Correct.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have a staff member who is charged with writing grants.
Thank you. So
Just a quick
there-
adjustment between the prior year. I think that's exactly right. The HERF expenditures on the federal side were obviously very significant in the prior year. So you do see a total decline in federal expenditures as a whole, and that's really exclusively driven to the spending down of the HERF funds. If you exclude those, it looks like your activity is up on the federal side. And then on the state grant side, sorry for the small font, but it looks like there was a pretty healthy increase from about 12.4 million up to 16.3 million in total state categorical spending. So that data's, there. We could make a note, Julie, if you wanted, nothing would stop us from putting another column in here going forward that had, kind of your totals from the prior year for comparative purposes, if that would be of value to the committee.
It does sound like it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I will. Because you already have the data.
Yes.
It would be, you already have the data, so it's not really a huge expense. So we don't have any other questions? Did you want to say anything, John, to finish up, or? Oh, sorry.
No, just a brief comment. Thank you for this report. It was not an easy read, but it was a reasonably clear read until I got to page 63. But I also wanted to thank you for acknowledging Vice President Morrison and her staff for the good work that they've done all year, and President Flamer as well. I think we have a lot of thank yous to make for getting the report that is so clean. from our management team. So thank you for acknowledging that in your remarks.
My pleasure. Yeah, no, the only question I would have is for the full board, if I should, just do a really high level, or would you just like me there for questions that might come up from other members, or what's your preference?
I think that's Rebecca's call, but
I would think the high.
the high level,
High
yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's on.
Perfect. I'll be prepared for that.
But I definitely would make it clear that the summary has moved to the beginning.
Okay.
The summary of findings. At least for me, that was pretty important to learn.
Yeah,
Okay, you as well.
well, yeah, because I went to the end.
Yeah, and so did I. And I'll start at the end, and then I went, they didn't do anything. You know? Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you in an hour or so.
My pleasure. I'll see you then.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
Okay. Bye.
So that you have to approve. Yeah.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
I'll move approval of the audit.
And I second that.
Any discussion? The one discussion I want to mention is I think this pension liability is huge, especially if they're banking on 6.9 and we end up with a 4.9. I don't.
That's millions.
Oh, yeah.
And you're right, we did explore, a state-sponsored trust
Okay.
that put money in, but we didn't need to at the time.
So I don't know how we would, that's a concern I have. I don't know how we would address it, or if we should be, Trustee Matthews?
Is the fund that you
Yes.
just mentioned, is that different than the money that we're putting into unfunded liability?
Yes, it is different,
Because it's pension, not other
Correct.
benefits.
correct. And we didn't need to do that because the state did put money into it. So we didn't have to. I think that the best place for the board to give direction to us is when the board sees the budget assumption. Because the board tells us where do you want us to focus the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
what advocacy efforts are being made? Because clearly it's not just affecting our district. Do you know if there are any lobbying or advocacy efforts?
There
regarding this?
are at the chancellor's level, there are significant
Okay,
efforts being made at chancellor.
I like the word significant. Yeah,
They are.
okay.
Because that's my question to the auditor was, what are the other districts doing? Because it's almost across the board, isn't it?
Absolutely is.
Right. So what's Shasta doing anything?
I don't know
yeah.
what they're doing. They just about to have a change in CEOs.
Okay.
So we'll see what we're doing with that.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like Mendes, you don't know.
I don't.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect you. I'm just
Yeah.
throwing it out there. Okay, so
Yeah.
any further?
No,
I'd like to point that out to the board, our concern over that.
I guess. It is a concern, but to me, it is couched in the context of everybody's in the same boat, hence significant advocacy concerns, because it is, to me, not to let us off the hook, so to speak, but to me, it is a system-wide problem.
It
It's
is
going to have to be solved at that level.
true, and although I and my fellow CEOs are aware of it, we are also concerned that if we put more money aside in the trust and the state's budget goes down, then we're gonna have to pull from someplace just to make payroll or to have a fund reserve. So there are really so many competing needs going on moving forward.
And that's what I was thinking is if you increased it and then the state came in and bailed everybody out, or something, then we should never put that extra money in.
but we wouldn't have lost the money.
No, but we wouldn't have needed to have done it. So are all districts putting similar amounts away like we are, or?
Not in a trust, but
Okay,
not in the trust.
they're putting it away,
They're either bearing it in their, didn't say bearing,
but what?
they're putting it in their fund reserve,
Okay,
or they have something else in OPEB.
So I know what we're doing with the OPEB, but what are we doing on the pension side?
Julia, do you have can you explore that with
We
us?
do have a little money set aside in our pension reserve. There's 500,000 sitting out there.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and so that's there. I know that won't go very far, at least it's something, but then also we do try to, within our, every year when we do our budget for the benefit side, we make sure to calculate our benefit estimates on the actual PERS and STRS, right? And that's just employer contribution. That's this whole state-wide level of liability is a different story, but I think we're doing the best that we can to stay on top of it. I'd be very interested to see what the advocacy efforts can lead to in the future, since it is a stable problem.
No, I think you're doing a great job on it. I'm gonna take it.
Oh, no, not at all, but
So our cash or our money that's with the county, what return do we get on that? Like
oh, gosh.
2%?
It's pretty low return.
It's low.
That's what I'm I'm just looking at the 6.9 compared to 2.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not even,
Just looking at that is sort of,
But you have to have that liquid asset.
oh, no, I'm yeah, I completely understand. So all those in favor of approving?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. So on to 3.3, community stadium update.
So we've been, we have an internal team that's been working on this project along with our development team, the architect and engineers, and also the company that has been assisting with the actual field and all the different components for the project. And we have a design that's pretty finalized. It's been submitted to DSA. But what we've been finding since the onset of this project and when we determined how much we wanted to borrow for the project, the cost of labor, the cost of construction, everything just been going up significantly. So now what we thought could be in the total scope for the project, we've had to whittle it down to try to stay within budget. But even then, what we're finding is that in order to have a viable project, with the components that what we deem are absolutely necessary, there's going to be some additional funding needed to move forward. So I've been talking with President Flamer. We've been trying to think of some internal solutions rather than having to borrow additional funds because the cost of borrowing is pretty high. So one recommendation that we came up with is to look at some of our current transfers out that are planned and possibly redirect them to capital outlay. And that would specifically be looking at OPEB, the transfer out for the current year and the transfer out for next year, because this project will cross over 50 years. The reason why I kind of look at OPEB as a possibility, and we wouldn't be drawing from OPEB, we would just be foregoing the 2 transfers out. They're both $750,000. Because the fund reserve for OPEB is currently a little over $3 million. And our OPEB actual costs for the year have been around $700,000. So we felt like we could afford to possibly forego those transfers out for this current year and for next year, and instead direct those funds to the community stadium project.
So I have a question about, you started, what's the difference in price? How much money are we talking?
So we initially had a budget of 5.5 million, and what's coming in now, and this is, yes, so what's coming in now for construction is about 8 million.
Whoa.
And this is
it's high,
after
it's going up.
value engineering some things out.
Because we borrow
7.5. and that
with
was
that dorm,
And so the other piece of that would be, we're on the pause on dorms right now.
right?
But we have already used some of that 7.5 million for the dorms. But to say, okay, we're gonna say 6.5 million of the 7.5, let's put to community stadium. And that 1 million we can have for the design for student housing as far as that will get us, while we're kind of waiting for the other pieces to fall into place.
So what other options are
There aren't.
there? Okay, that's,
Well, actually, yes, there were 2 options. One, borrow more, which puts us at greater fiscal risk that, quite frankly, I'm not willing to do. And also just moving money internally to fund the rest of the project. We need to go out for bid in about 2 weeks. And just to make the timing to have the stadium ready by next August.
So
So there really isn't a lot of, there isn't any risk for us to move money in the next 2 years from the general fund tool. As long as in the third year, we reinstitute the $750,000 check.
So we would be reducing it by $1.5 million, and there's about 3 million in there.
Correct.
I mean,
Yes,
we would be not reducing it, but we would not be adding that. And in that 2 years of that 3 million, we have to spend about $1.5 million.
Yes.
Trustee Muller?
I know we will be having a conversation, I guess, at a workshop about the bond.
we will, I should say.
Yeah, so what I'm gonna say is there's a lot of what ifs, but
Yeah.
if, we were to go forward with a bond, and I know that would be ways down the road, but could a bond also help support the community stadium? Would that be of interest to the district or in our best interest?
Could it? Yes, it could, as long as when we put the bond out for election, it's clearly stated it's for community stadium as well as. That's be pretty broad, but that's a lot of borrowing.
The community stadium, but that's a real, I think that really makes the bond issue sexier. I think that's huge.
I agree.
But it could, and also, we really want to throw in something for Del Norte as well.
But how could
So
you,
that's two questions, yes.
if we have to go out for the stadium, you said in 2 weeks, we have to accept the bid, is that what?
No, I think we're going out, go ahead.
We're gonna be publishing the bid documents on the 21st of
Okay.
December, and the bids are due January 25th. And the intent is that we'll have the recommendations award to the lowest bidder on the February board packet.
So my question is, you have something that's going, and I assume that means when we accept one, we've got to know what our funding for it is.
Correct.
And then the bond is after that,
Yes.
sort of retro. How could you really do that retro?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer. We'd have to talk to bond attorney unless you have a specific.
I mean, it's one way to answer it is there are items that we've had to cut out that we would like to have within the scope of the project those could be the add-ons were there to be general obligation.
Right. Okay, but that would be new as opposed to what we were looking at with the February acceptance.
And the other way to see it is, if the bond is approved, then we can always use that money to offset the second part of building the stadium. Again, it's a 2-year construction, so we can fund it the front end, and then if the bond passes, then we can still do fund that other $750,000. But also move into the phase 2, as Julia suggested, the phase 2 of the stadium that we had to cut out, which was like significant. But it does make for a 6-year bond, as you would say.
I do think, I agree with Richard that there would be support for the stadium, even if it's to support completing what we can say, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to do. I think the success of the sports programs
I agree.
and the local recruitment for those programs really would be an important part of supporting the bond.
Well, I think sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, it goes without saying, of course, that I would support funding for the necessary projects that Del Norte needs to do.
I mean, I think that the stadium on it, if somebody's on the fence, that the stadium rings true, because I'm not a big proponent of the bond. But but with the stadium, it's like, oh, well, maybe. Because there's so much, like you said, so much support for the athletics right now.
Well, if I may, on that note, I mean, would the foundation be in a position to help in any way through fundraisers or contributions?
Actually, we have talked for for the foundation about starting the process of fundraising for the things that we cut out. And those are significant items, but throwing the bonds and bond money towards the phase 2 projects would really help out. It would help significantly.
Because that was,
Stadium seating, other, like having lights in the stadium,
Yeah.
which we had to cut out, that would be very significant.
And those, it becomes, not that other, buildings and spaces aren't, but it also becomes a real community asset that appeals to
I
the
see your point, yeah.
community for sports at all levels, all different kinds of sports. It's really huge community asset.
Yeah, we
That's
could
huge.
host high school games and
Which,
such.
right,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
we were hoping to build right.
and we could throw in a pool too.
We don't want to go unless the board directs me to throw it.
Don't put that in the minutes.
We've gone down to pool.
No, no, I'm just, that was a joke.
Oh, nicely done. Nicely done.
Well, working ahead.
But yes, we should talk in January about the bond and what we want to throw it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good
But
idea.
that's not what you need from us today. What do you need from us today?
This was really just for discussion, and I think, and I'll let President Flamer correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our next step would be to draft up a resolution that would go to the board in January, possibly.
Yes.
Just recognizing that instead of transferring the funds to OPEB, we'd be doing a transfer to Copper Valley for this specific purpose.
So have we done that for this year yet? The transfer is just sitting there?
Done it yet, but the board did approve it.
Right, I understand the budget, yeah.
And
So we have to amend the budget big time.
we will, and in the past administrations have just moved money from OPEB to the fund without the board even knowing. We want to be upfront and transparent about what we're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And even if the board does approve the resolution, that doesn't mean if the bond passes that we can't rescind that resolution.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really bank on the bond to pay for phase 1.
We cannot, and that's
Yeah.
why we need to,
Yeah.
we need to plan in.
But he's saying that like in the second year, if we do have the bond, that maybe we wouldn't have to transfer the second 750.
Correct,
But no, you could,
that's correct.
but it's all phase 1. So,
For-
so you're gonna pass a bond. I mean, I think the attorney needs to say we can pass a bond that reimburses or something that's already under construction to pay for. See what I'm saying?
I do,
I mean, if the project's 8 million, and you spend 4 million the first year, we can't. Somebody has to do legal advice on that.
Make it very clear.
Yeah,
which is true,
yeah.
which is true. But the cost of phase 2 is also.
No, I understand this.
Right.
No,
So having the bond cover phase 2 is actually quite good,
yeah.
quite good.
So I report out on this, or what do you want me to do?
Yes.
Okay, so we have this discussion, but not, do you want to get into the transferring out or leave that alone or?
I think it'd be worth a conversation, an open session at the board, and we can call on.
Well, at least we get people thinking.
Right, and then that will also bring to the board in January resolution
Mhm.
to get us started. Yes.
Yeah, and it won't be such a surprise in January. Yeah,
We don't
Correct.
want some.
We don't like surprises.
We don't want surprises,
No
both to the
surprises.
board, but also our faculty and staff and students.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe a double.
So anything else you need?
Adjournment.
Adjourn. Meeting adjourned.